A stray puppy was hours from euthanasia until the vet read his collar. What if a forgotten collar could unlock a mystery that haunted an entire town for 15 years? Rain hammered the windows of Riverside Animal Clinic as Dr. Lillian Carter filed the last patient report of her 12-hour shift. The clock read 8:55 p.m. when the front door burst open. Kevin Mitchell, the local animal control officer, stumbled in soaking wet, clutching a trembling bundle wrapped in a drenched towel. "Doc, I'm sorry to come so late, but I didn't know where else to go," Kevin said, water dripping from his cap. Lillian's exhaustion vanished as her medical instincts kicked in. Kevin carefully unwrapped the towel, revealing a golden-brown puppy no more than 4 months old. Its fur was matted with rain and mud, its eyes wide with terror. "Found him behind the grocery store. The shelter's overcrowded, twice capacity. Tomorrow—" Kevin trailed off, but Lillian understood immediately. The shelter's euthanasia schedule. This puppy had less than 12 hours to live. "Kevin, she began, her throat tightening. But the puppy let out a small whimper that pierced through her defenses. "Just for tonight," Kevin pleaded. "If we can't find him a home by morning, he'll have to go back to the shelter, and you know what that means. Please, Doc." Lillian sighed and gestured toward the examination table. As she dried the shivering creature with a clean towel, her fingers brushed against something beneath the matted fur, a collar. The worn leather was cracked and faded, its inscription nearly illegible. She squinted, but the letters were too worn to read. "At least you're healthy," she murmured, trying to ignore how the puppy's tail wagged at the sound of her voice. That night, she settled the puppy in a kennel with a soft blanket and water bowl. As she turned to leave, he pressed his nose against the bars, his expressive brown eyes never leaving her face. A small whimper echoed through the quiet clinic, tugging at Lillian's carefully guarded heart. The next morning, Lillian arrived 15 minutes early, unable to sleep. Her mind kept returning to those pleading brown eyes and the clock ticking down. Kevin would be calling soon to take the puppy back to the shelter, back to a fate she couldn't bear to think about. When she finally made her way to the kennel, the puppy was already awake, his tail thumping excitedly against the floor, completely unaware of what awaited him. "Hey there," she said softly, surprised by the warmth in her own voice. She lifted him onto the exam table. In the morning light, she could see the collar more clearly. It was old, ancient, really, the leather cracked and faded as if it had been buried for years. But what struck her most was that it was far too large for the puppy's neck, hanging loose like it had been made for a much bigger dog. Her fingers worked to unbuckle it, and when she turned it over, something made her heart race. Engraved on the inside were barely visible words, worn smooth by time. "Lucky. If found, bring me home." Below was an address, 1247 Maple Grove Road. Lillian's hands began to shake. Everyone in town knew that address. 15 years ago, the Victorian house there had burned in a tragic fire. Today, only an empty lot remained, surrounded by chain-link fencing and overgrown with weeds. But this collar, it couldn't have belonged to this puppy. The puppy was only a few months old. This collar had to be from the original dog, Lucky, who'd been with Tommy Hayes 15 years ago. Somehow, this young puppy was wearing a relic from that tragedy. The puppy nudged her with his nose, bringing her back to reality. Lillian looked between the collar and the animal, her mind churning with questions. Should she pursue this mystery? Logic told her to call Kevin and surrender the puppy to his fate. But when she met those trusting eyes again, something awakened in her.
an intuition that this was about something bigger. She picked up her phone and called Kevin. "I'm keeping him," she said firmly. "I'll take responsibility. This puppy isn't going back to the shelter." Kevin's relieved sigh came through the line. "Thank God, Doc. I was hoping you'd say that." Lillian hung up and looked down at the puppy, who wagged his tail as if he understood he'd just been saved. "All right, boy. Now let's figure out what your collar is trying to tell us."
That afternoon, Lillian drove to Maple Grove Road. The burned lot stretched like an open wound in the otherwise well-maintained neighborhood. As she approached the fence, an elderly woman emerged from the neighboring house. "Can I help you?" the woman called out, her voice friendly but cautious. Lillian introduced herself and explained she was seeking information about the family who had lived there. "I'm Martha Collins. I've lived here for 40 years, Martha set down her watering can. "What a tragedy. What happened to the Hayes family?" "Could you tell me about them?" Martha's gaze drifted. "Daniel and Sarah Hayes moved in with their children in 2009. The fire happened a year later." She wiped her eyes. "The police said it started in the kitchen late at night. They found most of the family." Lillian noticed the word most. Martha nodded slowly. "The youngest, Tommy, he was only 6. They never found him. The police searched for weeks, but—" She trailed off, staring at the overgrown lot. "Some say he must have fled before the fire. Others think—" She couldn't finish. "When exactly was this?" "It'll be 15 years ago this coming July. July 15, 2010. I'll never forget that date." Back in her car, Lillian pulled up news articles on her phone while the puppy watched her intently. There were so many unanswered questions about that night. The cause of the fire remained mysterious. The missing child had never been found. No body, nothing. A movement in her rearview mirror made her jump. A figure stood in the shadow of a large oak tree across the street. When Lillian turned to look directly, the figure had vanished. That evening at home, Lillian spread old newspaper articles across her kitchen table. The headlines told fragments of horror. "Hayes family fire claims 4 lives." But reading further, she realized only 3 bodies had been recovered: Sarah, her husband Daniel, and their older son Michael. Tommy had simply disappeared. She called her friend Ryan Porter, a local detective. "Ryan, I need information about an old case, the Hayes House fire 15 years ago." A silence fell. "That's ancient history, Lil. Why are you interested?" She mentioned the puppy and the collar, trying not to sound alarmed. "Listen," Ryan's voice softened. "That case haunted the whole town. We searched for months without finding the kid. But if you want, I'll send you what I have. Just be careful, Lil. Sometimes it's better to leave certain cases closed." The next day, Lillian's assistant Sophie watched with concern as Lillian pored over the files Ryan had sent. "Dr. Carter," Sophie said gently, "that puppy needs his morning exam." Lillian nodded absently, still focused on her reading. Sophie placed a hand on her shoulder. "I recognize that look. You're getting involved in something big, aren't you?" Lillian finally looked up. "I need to know, Sophie." "Know what?" Sophie sighed softly. "Or are you just looking for someone to save, like after James?" The name hit Lillian like a shock. No one had mentioned her late husband in years. "This is different," Lillian protested, her voice trembling. "Really?" Sophie's eyes were compassionate but firm. "We can't save everyone, doctor.
Sometimes we have to accept that the past stays in the past. But Lillian couldn't let it go. Something told her this puppy was the key to everything.
The following week brought a startling discovery. Lillian was walking the puppy near the burned property on Maple Grove Road when a mysterious man emerged from the shadows, tall, in his early 20s, with haunted eyes. He approached quickly, his gaze fixed on the dog. "That's my dog," he said, his voice urgent but broken. "I need him back." Lillian stepped back protectively. "This puppy was a stray. If he's yours, you'll need to prove it." After a tense confrontation, the man's desperation gave way to exhaustion. He revealed his name, Daniel. He had no memory of his past, only fragments and nightmares of fire. He'd been drawn to the burned property for months without knowing why. When Lillian showed him the old collar, Daniel's face went white. I found that in the ashes months ago," he whispered. "I've been carrying it around, not knowing why. When I found this puppy wandering the streets, something made me put it on him. I thought maybe someone would see it and know what it meant. I couldn't remember, but I felt like I had to get someone to that address." Lillian's instincts told her this was no coincidence. She contacted Henry Bennett, Tommy Hayes' great-uncle, who agreed to help investigate. Together with Daniel, they tracked down Elliot Grayson, a retired firefighter living in a care home 3 hours north. According to old records, an anonymous firefighter had rushed into the burning Hayes house and saved someone before vanishing. At Cedar Grove Care Home, they found Elliot by a window, staring at autumn leaves. "Mr. Grayson," Lillian approached gently, "we're investigating the Hayes fire from 15 years ago."
Elliot's face went pale. After a long moment, he spoke, his voice breaking. "I haven't talked about that night in years. I wasn't officially on duty. I lived in the neighborhood. I saw the flames and ran in. The smoke was so thick. I heard a child screaming upstairs." He closed his eyes. "I found a little boy hiding in the hallway, curled up, his face black with soot. He was barely breathing. The boy kept whispering a name, Lucky, Lucky, like he was calling for his dog. I carried him down and handed him to paramedics. But then something struck my head. I woke up in the hospital days later with amnesia. I couldn't remember who I was or how I got there. They told me I'd saved a kid, but I was too broken, too confused. So I disappeared, started over with a new identity." Daniel, who'd been silent, suddenly stood and stumbled from the room, overwhelmed. Lillian found him in the hallway, tears streaming down his face, memories flooding back. "It was me," Daniel whispered, his voice cracking. "I was that boy. You saved my life." When they returned to Elliot, the old firefighter stared at Daniel with recognition dawning in his eyes. "Those eyes. You're him. You're the boy from the fire. You're Tommy Hayes." DNA tests eventually confirmed what seemed impossible. Daniel Hayes, presumed dead in the fire, was alive. Tommy Hayes, the 6-year-old boy who vanished 15 years ago, was now a 21-year-old man with no memory of his childhood. The news spread quickly, but Daniel refused interviews. Henry welcomed him home. Lillian stayed close, ensuring he didn't slip back into denial. Together, they transformed the burned lot into a memorial garden, a place of healing. Daniel planted roses and wildflowers, erected a bench, and added a plaque honoring his parents and brother. The puppy, whom Daniel officially named Lucky, played among volunteers as they worked. One evening, Lillian gave Daniel a new collar for Lucky, with a medal engraved. "You found me, and I found you." "You needed a symbol to move forward," she said, smiling. Daniel, tears in his eyes, embraced her while Lucky demanded his share of affection. Over time, the Memorial Garden became a community gathering place and an adoption center for stray animals. Daniel found purpose there, supported by Lillian, Sophie, and Henry. Elliot sent letters expressing relief that the child he'd saved was thriving. One spring morning, as Daniel and Lillian worked in the garden with Lucky at their feet, Daniel spoke softly to the memorial plaque. "Thank you for staying," he said to Lillian. She slipped her hand into his. "You and Lucky transformed me just as I helped you." Lucky, hearing his name, joined them, an unbreakable bond connecting past and present. Daniel had lost everything in that fire, but from the ashes, he'd built something new: a home, a family, and a second chance at life. If this story touched your heart, please subscribe for more inspiring true stories. Hit the like button and tell us in the comments what you thought. We'll see you in the next video.